Hello folks, this is Dr. DeValley, and this is the part one of a two-part video on doing anthropological fieldwork. We're going to cover some of the basics of ethnography and some of the history of ethnography. Each video has approximately 15 slides each.
The first thing that is required to do ethnography is to get out of the classroom. Here is a more or less typical anthropology classroom. Actually, the room looks a lot like my office. Not that the classroom isn't necessary for many things, but for doing ethnographic fieldwork, you have to get out of the classroom. That's because it's hard to study people when you are in a classroom, unless the purpose is to study the people in the classroom. Now, there's 7 characteristics of ethnographic research. The first, it's conducted in a natural setting. In other words, the anthropologist actually goes out and among the people that he or she is studying in the real world. And it's done within the field site, the location that is selected to do the ethnographic research. And also it provides a holistic and systematic overview of the context. In other words, since it is a real-life setting, even though, say, the research project might be to study politics in a particular community, because you're actually in the community in the natural setting, you also see how politics is related to other aspects of life, maybe to religion, maybe to marriage, or whatever. That's what is meant by holistic. And it also documents the native perspectives, that through observing and interviewing the people of the group you are studying, you document their worldview, their perspective of their life and culture, and that is very important. And then 5, anthropological ethnographic research is descriptive and interpretive. It describes what the ethnographer saw and heard, and also his or her interpretations of what he or she saw or heard. And then 6, it's guided by general research questions and not a specific hypothesis. So normally the anthropologist goes into the field with some general idea of what he or she wants to study among the group, but does not have specific hypotheses. That's because ethnographic fieldwork is really, sort of data-driven, or not data-driven. It's driven from the bottom up. That in the process of doing the ethnographic search, of being among the people, the anthropologist generally would develop more specific hypotheses, which then can be later tested through other means, generally using more quantitative type means like surveys, etc. And then this is what is meant by grounded theory. In other words, any specific hypotheses that develop from fieldwork are grounded in the process of observation itself. And then 7, characteristic of ethnographic research is that it focuses on meaning of word and images rather than numbers. In other words, it's focusing on what people say and what the ethnographer sees, rather than doing survey type research or focusing simply on counting. Not that that is not very important, but that usually comes from the ethnographic experience where specific hypotheses are developed. Now, you might say, I thought anthropologists only study primitive or simple societies. What use could it be for me now in the 21st century and in my career, which is probably not going to be in anthropology? Well, to a certain extent, that is true. Early anthropology did focus on studying simple societies. Pretty much the father of American anthropology is Franz Boas. He was actually a German, and he was doing his PhD thesis in geography. And in 1883, he went to Baffin Island to study the Central Inuit, the Central Eskimo. And he eventually published an ethnography called the Central Eskimo. What happened was, in the field, his focus changed from studying the ethnography to studying the people. He also got stuck in there for the winter, and he stayed longer than he expected to. And but that gave him really a much better insight as to the life of the Eskimo people in the late 19th century. He is also thought of as the father of American anthropology. He was one of the first anthropology professor at Columbia University, and also he worked at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. Here is a picture of him, and also here's a picture of him in Eskimo garb, and that is the pose Inuit people or Eskimo men take when they are ice fishing. You see to the left is the harpoon, and the man sits by a hole in the ice waiting from some movement by a seal, and then he will plunge the harpoon through the hole to get the...
Here are some photos of the Central Eskimo, Central Inuit, taken early in the last century. On the upper left is a woman ice fishing, and on the lower left is a man harpooning a walrus.
Now, another early anthropologist who conducted field work among simpler peoples was actually a Polish anthropologist named Bronislaw Malinowski. And he did his field work among the Trobriand Islands. And if you look at the world globe of the map, you'll see in the lower left is Australia, that yellow. The smaller yellow is the island of New Guinea, and in the red box is where the Trobriand Islands are. So you can see in the larger map, the Trobriand Islands are off the coast of Papua New Guinea. And it's interesting, he went to the Trobriands in, I think, early 1914, and then the World War I broke out. So he was stuck on those islands for actually 4 years. So he lived 4 years among the Trobriands. And he wrote a very famous work called Argonauts of the Western Pacific, where he analyzed their trade and marriage ceremonies. And it was a very famous and classical work. Here are some pictures of him. On the upper left, he's talking with some men. On the lower right, the same as well. He's sitting outside a hut, chatting. And on the upper right, it looks like he's talking with some children. Now, he looks very much like the European colonialist. But you have to remember this was 1915, 1916, and the world was different. But he was definitely a man who is sympathetic with the Trobriand Islanders that he studied. Here again is another good photo of him with some men, and they're holding gourds, and they're probably drinking a kind of beer that they make and that the men drink. In more recent times, the study of simpler society was another famous work was by a man named Napoleon Chagnon, and he studied the Yanomami Indians of the Amazon, which really was northern Venezuela. And, here the lower right shows him when he was much younger with the people, and up above here he is many years later still returning. And he described the Yanomamo as the fierce people because they were really in constant intertribal wars. This book had a great influence on me, and it led me to develop my theory of the purpose of intertribal warfare in simple societies, which led to my topic of my master's thesis. Here is a group of Yanomami men ready to go out on a war party. This photo was probably taken around 1970. You can already see the beginnings of some missionary influence. You notice some of the men are wearing these kind of loincloths covering their genitals. That is not traditional. The Yanomami men normally are naked. They have a little string tied around the head of their penis, which is lifted up and then tied around their waist. So this wearing of this little loincloth is really influence of some Catholic missionaries that began work in that area in the 1950s and 60s. Here are some other photos of the Yanomami. The upper left, you notice the man has looks like a wad in his mouth. That's a wad of tobacco that they put under their gum, and they pretty much like absorb the nicotine that way. And here is a group of women with their children. Based that they're all clustered together like that, it looks like they're watching a feast take place and a parade of the men. They're also dressed with leaves, feathers, and paint, which they are doing for like a special event. Normally, on a normal day, they wouldn't have those decorations. Now, the aspects of collecting ethnographic data, if you look at the little white circle in the middle, the essential methods up on the upper left are observation. This is what you are asked to do, for example, in the coffee house ethnography. Ethnographic interviews, doing content analysis of what people say and what you see. Some kind of tests and repeated measures are also done, as well as surveys. There are supplementary methods on the upper right, which would be conducting focus groups, elicitation methods where you would ask members of the group particular questions where you're trying to get their thinking about a particular issue. And of course, audio-visual methods, audio and photograph, etc. And then finally on the bottom are specialized methods, especially spatial mapping and social network analysis, which are more advanced techniques, and as undergraduates you wouldn't necessarily be expected to do that, with the exception of maybe physical mapping of the environment you are working. From here we move on to part 2 of the video. Thank you for watching so far.